Thank you, and thank you to Stuart and Michael for sort of seeing how design is dealt with now in a carbon. If only we were doing this sort of 50 years ago, we probably wouldn't find ourselves in a couple of the problems. So just as an introduction, so I'm Alex Smith from Shepherd Robson Architects. I have been involved with Pall for getting on close to a decade with different clients, looking at a modernist listed building within the centre of the old traditional business district, and actually trying to find new life to a modernist listed building when there's inherently lots of problems with the original fabric and the design. So this is going to be the most sort of intensive project that will look exactly the same at the end, but without people within this room helping us develop those solutions, this project would have taken a little bit longer in its sort of inception. So just a slight history lesson. So in the wisdom after the war, they like to think, modernity is the way forward, and at that time not respecting that cultural heritage that Manchester certainly was able to retain against other cities that had that sort of industrial revolution so they decided to demolish an Alfred Waterhouse, so the architect of the town hall, and develop a modernist style curtain wall building in its sort of replacement. The building was designed as a headquarters building for the Sun Alliance Insurance, which then became Royal Sun Alliance. Now, during that process of their merger, they then decided they didn't need this regional headquarters. So as the building was completed, it was already obsolete for its intended design. So then the owner had to then work through on how they could turn it into a multi-occupancy building within a very strong design that is very departmental led to suit the needs of the then headquarters building. It was listed in just at the turn of millennium, and it was listed because it was designed as a headquarters building. And obviously with that listing that had come with it, that means that whoever was to take on as the custodian of that building, we went through extra heritage-based approaches to try and realise what this asset could be. And for that reason, a lot of owners have come and gone, and I've worked on this project with a previous owner until in 2021, Bruntwood Sci-Tech bought the building, and Bruntwood Sci-Tech, if you're local to Manchester and beyond, you know that they're very good custodians of their buildings, and with their proven track record in delivering sustainable solutions, it was the right owner for possibly the wrong building, as it were. So the building itself, right within the historic central business district, there were some really important routes through from the Bank of England to the Stock Exchange at that time, the Midland Bank at the top, the Lutyens buildings, Norwich Union, their commercial rival next door, Lloyd's with a regional HQ. It was the place to be when this building was designed. But equally, as I've mentioned, as the building was never occupied as such, there was inherent problems with the original design that were causing a blight to that part of the city, whether that was antisocial behaviour, the orientation of some of the blocks, and how the architecture hit the ground to actually create sense of place within, and it was an underutilised asset within the city core. Notwithstanding levels, they didn't really care about that back in the day. It was just, we'll pick a datum and we'll go with it. But actually what that does, when you're trying to put this asset back as something really, really unique within the city, we had to respond to that within our design proposals. So our response was a new entrance within what was the Piazza area, which was taking the entrance off King Street. And I'm doing this for a little bit of context, and you'll see why that when I go through these iterations, what we want to do and then what we had to do beyond that, you think to yourself, why was this building listed in the first place? So a new entrance, a new F&B hospitality-led arrival. So I think that as you walk into that hotel, you've got your bar, you've got your reception area. This was that sort of concept of having a F&B-led arrival, grab your coffee, go up into the office, and actually exposing that facade within that building element. We were going to enliven the building, so when the building is complete, there will be 65% of the building occupied as part of the Bruntwood Cytec sort of cellular units that they rent out individually. But equally, having space for tenants to come in and really sort of push that use of the building. And it's quite interesting, the building as it's currently at vacant possession, companies were actually paying not to be there. So they were paying their rent, they were paying their business rates, but they were using the floor plates as stock rooms, storerooms, and of the likes because of the performance of the facade within the building. So then we were looking to activate the King Street entrance, the former entrance, and then we were then also looking at rooftop interventions, and also then activating the piazza by taking away a lot of the facade within that as well, and then within the basement, so amenity spaces that support Bruntwood Cytec's well-being-led buildings for gyms, shower facilities, cycle facilities, and of the likes. So Bruntwood wanted us to turn this into a sustainable hub. They wanted us to retain the frame. Obviously, there's not a lot we could do with the listing. So, just inherently saving the project would save us just under 8,000 tons of carbon. They wanted the building to be EPC A. They wanted a net carbon zero fit out, net carbon zero in construction, and an all electric building. But we had to have a look at this in the context of a 53-year-old fully curtain-walled facade, which I'll go through in a minute. So it wasn't sort of an easy task to sort of take that brief and think that all of those interventions that we were trying to do to a Grade 2 listed building would be difficult enough in themselves. But what the building wouldn't have any success unless the facade performed. And for reasons such as tenants not being an attractive building, not having the thermal comfort levels, obviously a fully glazed system. Obviously, Stuart and Michael talked about how we are reducing those levels of glazing and the ratio of glazing to solid. We didn't have all of those benefits of the existing building, so we had to come up with a strategy and work closely with supply chain partners to actually faithfully restore the facade. But just sort of how we will work through that, I'll just show you some images of the completed sort of design as we're on site now. But we were looking at cutting back, opening up for the facade at lower levels, activating the piazza levels, the entrance arrival, and sort of really sort of enlivening a part of the city that was pretty much forgotten. Internally, we had very tight floor-to-floors. It was a fully naturally ventilated building as the original conception. Sort of having to look at those heritage-led response, but also bringing in sort of new and efficient mechanical and electrical systems, which all the facade would support. And these are just some of the images of what the internals will look like. So on a listed building, so if we'd kept the Alfred Waterhouse, we'd probably, as a team, we would understand how that building would need to have the thermal performance of that facade upgraded, because we have been doing that probably for the last 30 years. With the new sort of pre-millennium and post-millennium buildings that have been listed, most of them have adopted modern methods of construction and the materiality, and actually those systems are often coming to their end of their life. For those, we specify systems that we just put in our specification, 30-year lifespan, 50-year lifespan. Those buildings are now at the end of life, and when they're in a listed building sort of confinement, there's something we need to come up with to actually replace these facades, but actually still keep the spirit of the listing. What you would find if this building wasn't listed, architects such as BDP, Make and Shepherd Robson would come along and we'd put some new designs and we would do that whole approach as if it was a new building. We don't have that luxury. So we obviously had the brief from Bruntwood Cytec, make this the most well-being hub. We want the extensions, we want you to cut away the facade, we want you to cut and carve the building, fine. But we also need to have a look at how we look at that facade and how we replace it. So the facade itself, the building, very precise. The architects of the 1960s, they still had that classical training. They still had the mentors that were coming out of the sort of the new levels of architecture. So there's lots of visual interest in the building that lots of people walk past and go, I don't understand why this is listed. I don't understand what the look of the building. You know, the building itself is brown, and that is only because at the time on King Street, all of the buildings were so dirty. They weren't looked after, that the brown colour was seen to be blending in to the existing facade. So you're working with those sort of design decisions that were made. But we have a solid, all of the cores are in solid mosaics, concrete, no insulation, mosaics, bonded to the concrete, all handmade mosaics, absolutely stunning, very expensive to replace, so there's limited things that we could do there. And then all of the office elements are fully glazed, and they are fully glazed in a very rigorous way, so proportions, symmetry, all of the things that architects really sort of enjoy when you start to sort of reveal those layers. But the building itself, poor air tightness. So the air tightness at the base was just a contraband strip. There was no membranes, there was no air tightness on that. So that's the first thing. People were sitting at their desk and paper could blow off their desk. It was that sort of element. Deflecting frames, curtain wall systems. They'd been around for sort of 40 or so years at that time. But technologies were still developing, so the frames were starting to deflect. We had single glazed Pall glazing, so Pilkingtons at the time were really pushing that brown glass. It was a way of sort of marrying some of the colours and the hues of the sort of the industrialised cities, but again using non-safety Pall glazing in today's world would not be there. Line loading not existent whatsoever. A single glazed system in a curtain wall system that's 50 years old, not there. And then actually when you think, if I just point out actually, when I talk about natural ventilation, the windows that steal the fades, they're actually sashed windows. The natural ventilation came from low level opening windows with no fall restraint. So if you took your small child into the office back then, probably would be frowned upon. They could climb out and fall to their death. That's the design that was at the time. Obviously, they didn't really think about thermally broken systems. So we had a system, they're cold to the touch, with an approximate U value of about 6.5. So when you're looking at those metrics, what the hell are we going to do to this facade? I'm still not done on what's wrong with the facade. They had mill finished aluminium. They didn't send it to powder coated at the time. It was site applied with a brush. So you actually have layers and layers of paint, of un-UV stable paint across the facade, all peeling off, all revealing different colours depending on which elevation you're looking at. It leaks. Great, thanks. Another one. So the single glazing, the gaskets are gone. Over time, previous owners just got the silicone gun out and tried to sort of patch repair. Asbestos in the gaskets, great. Another thing. Let's keep going. It's that sort of thing that everything that you touched on that facade, very right and fit for purpose at the turn of the late 1960s, early 70s. But when we're trying to look at how we bring this facade forward and how we deal with it, it's a bit of a nightmare, as you can see. So how do we go about it? Obviously, everyone's very interested. So not only Manchester City Council, they're very supportive. They knew it was an undervalued asset. The head city planner, Dave Roscoe, has been wanting something for this building to happen for as long as he's probably been the head planner. The conservation team are on board as well. They understood that this asset could fail, but obviously it's not very good in the current context to let this building fail. Historic England, again, they understood the problems, but obviously we had hurdles to deal with them. And then we had sort of the more sort of fringe groups that have an interest in modernist buildings, being the Modernist Society and the 20th Century Society, who would quite happily leave the building as it is, and then we would not get anywhere. So we had to please all of these people, as well as please our client, as well as please not just how Shepherd Robson would approach this, but also the team that were working with us. It's as sort of Stuart and Michael said, it's not just us that as architects, we a whole team of people that help us with this. And actually having, again, Bruntwood SciTech sort of understanding, so well, actually, let's not just do the cheapest thing. Let's actually understand what we can do with our asset. Let's really push boundaries. Let's see where we can go. So having the support of your client to really explore how this building can be brought forward. So we reviewed a number of options, and I won't go through all of them, but there were 8 options that ran concurrently. So you're trying to develop the design, you're trying to meet historic England, you're trying to look at the design of the new interventions, you're trying to completely coordinate the design. But we had to have a look at 8 options, from a do-nothing through to a highly bespoke system, through to looking at standard components, secondary glazing and of the likes. We had to run those 8 options with 14 different criteria, and this is just to prove the proof of concept to Historic England, to the Conservation Officer, to the 20th Century Society. We had to make sure that everything that this was an airtight, robust approach, how you would deal with a curtain-walled modernist building, which the problem that is going to come in many years to come, and is actually realised now, is that these buildings need an approach, and that approach comes by only bringing in all of the specialists very early on, whether that's how we're going to look at the interface with the membrane, the curtain wallers, the insulation, how we're really going to sort of go through that. So we went through all of that. We had a big matrix. This has actually gone, see, just there, you can see that then had hundreds of drawings behind to prove every junction and detail, and how that was appropriate, how that wasn't appropriate, how the cost was going up on one and not on the other. So that was sort of really robustly taken through before we were even allowed to start touching the facade. We had to give them that level of confidence that we were making the right carbon decisions for the facade. We could get that same aesthetic. We could really realise the interface detail with those options in concept form only. So we got them to agree to a 93% of the facade replacement, which, with all of the other interventions, it's actually a big sort of win for this building typology. For those who know Peter Jones on Sloane Square in London, they went through, the architect who was refurbishing that went through a very robust process, but ended up only replacing components of that facade, and that's only set that building up probably for the next 10, 15 years. I think what we wanted to ensure that we were setting this building up for the next 50 years, and we were still making sure that this asset had a life well beyond that. So once we got the approvals, we were like, well, okay, how are we going to tackle this? So all of the supply chain came in, and very early engagement on product selection, how we were going to sort of look through more of the easier technical things, what colour is the glass? We went through about 60 glass samples. We had a whole colour wheel done of every facade, colour analysis back at the lab to make sure that we could get the original colour of the brown or from the 1969. And then all of that was just they were the easy bits, sampling, colour right, yes, tick, glass right, tick, yeah, it's right for each elevation. But then we went into that virtual prototyping. So for those, these drawings will be familiar to Michael's shoot. You get the drawing in, you go, oh, that looks about right. You've got it there, it fills its dimensional tolerances between the existing facade. Then you start sort of scratching that surface and you go, oh, actually, I don't like how that junction looks. So let's have a little look at this. And sometimes these would never be realized until you get that mock-up that we saw that Stuart did on the New Bailey. You get that cruciform, you understand, you look at the detail, you make that modification. Historic England and the Conservation Officer would not let us take anything off the facade until we had sort of gone through a very robust process even before we understood how the original was built. So we went through, we 3D printed corners, junctions, we looked at, well, the good thing about the 3D printers, they can pick up those little nuances where the fold of a corner joint starts to introduce new verticals, horizontals, starts to really take away from the original makeup of the facade. And without that early supply chain input and facade experts coming along the journey, some of these things would have made this project a bit of a dog's dinner. But as you can see, every corner was looked at, justified. So then we went into sort of further prototyping on, okay, we've got the dimensions there. Oh, we don't like the bead. The conservation officer didn't like the bead. How do we do that? We couldn't replicate the initial sequencing and the because what they did on the existing, they just went, oh, there's a gap there. Let's silicon seal that up. It's probably not a robust detail. We didn't want to recreate something that was going to cause all of those problems within the existing facade. So, so we had to, everything that we would go through, there would always be a justification. So we went back into prototype mode. We kind of got them to agree. So we kind of were getting there, and we got down to a 7 mil tolerance. So now this is going from a single glazed uninsulated system to a double glazed insulated system. So an amazing sort of a refinement of that process to create something really unique. So only when we got to that point, they said, right, we're confident that you can achieve design. We will let you take one bay off. You can understand how it's constructed. You can understand how the membrane is sort of interfaced with the mosaics. And we can see how how the original sort of facade was envisaged. And you can see in some of the images, and I'll just sort of move over, different colours internally, externally. Again, if you just got a paintbrush and that's what you need to do, that's how it was sort of dealt with at the time. But what we actually had was a very early sort of example of a unitized facade. We had the bits that the elements of the work that were actually to the slab, were the actual rigid pieces, and then the form of construction for each of the bays slid and slotted on, and they came off site. Now we had a look at whether we could do that again, and actually it wasn't the right solution with how we developed, but we really could see that very poor detailing was inherent throughout the scheme, and that's why the water ingress and the air tightness were there. So once we went through that, we then were able to replace it with a bay, but we were getting into those sort of details. Weep holes, they didn't want them. Okay, how do we deal with that? How do we look at the flashings? Doesn't represent as the existing. How do we get that robust detail into the existing facade? And having the supply chain involved, workshopping details, making sure that we could hide membranes and air tightness sort of lines, and wherever that might be, we really sort of got in the room until we got the solution that was needed. But then when we go through, we then say, well, okay, you've got certain nuances of the detail that need to be sort of then worked through. And we came to an understanding with the local authority that actually, if we could technically justify why a detail needed to be a detail, and hence why I keep mentioning the supply chain, we had to have that. If we can't achieve it like that, how can we do it? How can we do that? How can we prove that that detail is robust enough and is going to be fit for purpose? And if there's a deviation against the original design intent, then that was something that we then went through. So to achieve a shadow gap, we then went into other elements. So taking the facade design, having a look at where condensation might deal with, where dew points, how we can, and this level of detail that you see here, we were doing that back on those 8 options, and as you can see, the intensity of that process to try and make sure that final process would actually recreate the facade. And then they were quite kind to us. They said, okay, we don't need to see that bit built, so we were allowed to build certain samples that didn't have to be in situ on the facade. So we could start to test fixings, how countersunk fixings and the likes would work. So those supplementary prototypes. There's probably 3 or 4 of those supplementary prototypes that on the bay of the window that we were then sort of faithfully recreating. So then the final approvals, we had the windows, we had the glass, we had the spandrels, we had every joint, looked through with a fine-tooth comb and all through sort of collaboration with the chain. And then we then spent that time saying, okay, after nearly 2 years from picking up the design to getting to where we are now, we were in that spot the difference sort of approach. And that sort of technical-led approach, along with the design aesthetic of achieving that facade, we have now set a sort of almost a prototype of how to deal with modernist-listed curtain wall buildings on their facade renewal approach. So in summary, we achieved the close aesthetic match, which obviously ticked all the boxes from 20th Century Society, Modernist Society. They were great. We've had the University of Manchester come and have a look at that exemplar approach to how you replicate that historic approach. Using a bespoke option, it's still a Technal system, but there's some bespoke dies that have been made, so we can achieve that close match. We've got this significant improvements in heat loss and air tightness, which we'd expect. We've gone beyond that contraband strip, so we've got that there. And then just sort of on the energy consumption. So if we'd had left that existing facade in place, we would have just been chucking out 45% of the carbon every year of that building, and we've reduced that significantly. Interestingly, even though this is a very, very expensive solution, the carbon payback is now only 7 years. So when you think yourself, we had a 53-year-old building, we were tinkering around the edges, or the previous owner was tinkering around the edges of how to. We've now set that building for the next 50 years and beyond, and with a 7-year payback, that seems a really good, not only for anybody who takes this building on, but a good thing for the environment. And then, as I say, the life cycle. So we've gone, because we now understand everything about that building, we are thinking of that 50 to 60-year lifespan of extending that building. And whilst we haven't got the U values of the new build projects, because we still have existing mosaics that we're not allowed to touch, we've got cores that we cannot sort of achieve, we have that U value of a 2. And then when we were looking at a 6.5 U value at the beginning of the process, we were able to sort of achieve that. So in summary, we were able to faithfully restore that facade, close engagement, very, very watchful eyes over us by all the statutory bodies. We were able to achieve all our interventions to that, and now we have repositioned the building so it's fit for purpose for the next 50 years. So thank you.
Any questions from being sick and bottom was I jump again, but it feels good every time I just bet. My question I was going to ask is, obviously it is quite an evening project, and we're talking about how it weaves and pros like other small buildings. If someone was taking out something like this, what be your one piece of like big advice up front?
Well, don't try and apply for delisting. I think is I think any business, any building potential buyer will understand what they're buying, and I think there are certain developers that think, I've got this asset, and then when they get the asset, they don't understand what to do with it. So I think, if I was to advise a client of when they're doing their due diligence of what type of buildings, I think it would be best to advise to sort of say that process, because the thing that is taken is the time, it's the program. We were only just starting on site. Well, we started on site at the beginning of this year. We were able to do some enabling packages, but essentially that process it's not just that usual typical planning application that developers would expect. So if somebody has that time to invest, and Bruntwood Site being a owner occupier, long custodian of a building, that's the sort of approach you need to think about taking. You can't buy these buildings lightly. You can't buy these buildings thinking that you're going to be able to install standard systems. You have to sort of go through that love and robustness to achieve that. So yeah, program would be or it would be my main one there.
Thank you so much. So give me a list.
No, we're on site at the moment. We're just doing the window strip at the moment. So yeah, so it's it will be finished in sort of Q3 next year.
Role. Be sure you do something differently.
Well, it's interesting. I think had we not, I think approaching it next time, I think we would have the confidence of the city and historic England to achieve the final product. It would have, if we were allowed to take away a bay a bit earlier, we might have been able to sidestep a couple of those approaches. But actually having a dynamic facade, because what we actually did, we tendered the facade whilst we were still going through this process. So the facade designers were able to be very much integrated in listening firsthand what those risks were. So if we were able to take off that bay early, we probably would have understood the facade a little bit more. But that is just part of the planning process, unfortunately. Thank you.